Flight 1572, the untold story of a near disaster. On a stormy night in November 1995, American Airlines Flight 1572 was en route to Bradley International Airport, Connecticut, carrying 78 souls. What should have been a routine landing turned into a nightmare that would be etched in the annals of aviation history. The flight crew, battling against nature's fury, made a small mistake that spiraled into a chain of events, leading them to the brink of disaster. This is the story of how a nearly fatal mistake brought an MD-83 inches from catastrophe and how the courage and quick thinking of the crew saved everyone on board. A night to remember. It was November 12, 1995. The 73 passengers aboard American Airlines Flight 1572, which had departed from Chicago's O'Hare Airport, were unaware of the harrowing journey ahead. The flight, bound for Bradley International Airport in Hartford, Connecticut, was delayed by almost 2 hours due to the severe weather that gripped much of the eastern United States. Heavy rains, thunderstorms, and powerful winds were wreaking havoc, causing widespread flight cancellations and delays. When the plane finally pushed back from the gate at 10:45 p.m., the passengers and crew were eager to get to their destination, but little did they know that they were about to face one of the most challenging flights of their lives. Meet the crew. In the cockpit that night were Captain Kenneth Lee and First Officer John Richards. Captain Lee, 39, was an experienced pilot with 8,000 hours of flying experience, over half of which were on the MD-80 series aircraft. Before joining American Airlines in 1986, Lee had served in the U.S. Air Force. First Officer Richards, 38, also had an impressive record with just over 5,000 hours of flight time, around 2,000 of which were on the MD-80. Like Lee, Richards had a military background, having flown for the U.S. Air Force before joining American Airlines in 1989. The aircraft they were flying that night was an 8-year-old McDonnell Douglas MD-83, a workhorse of the skies known for its reliability. American Airlines was the world's largest operator of the MD-80 series, with over 300 in service during the 1990s. This particular model had a stellar safety record, and it was the backbone of American's domestic fleet. Into the storm. At 5 minutes past 11, the plane lifted off from O'Hare, climbing into the turbulent skies. As the aircraft neared its cruising altitude of 33,000 feet, the pilots received a weather update from American Airlines Dispatch. The information included strong gusting winds and rapidly falling atmospheric pressure at Bradley International Airport. For pilots, atmospheric pressure is crucial. It directly affects the altimeter, which tells them how high they are above sea level. Lower air pressure means the altimeter reads higher than the actual altitude, a potentially dangerous situation. Despite the ominous weather report, the flight progressed relatively smoothly during the cruise. At one point, Captain Lee climbed to 35,000 feet to avoid turbulence, but the tranquility was short-lived. At midnight, the aircraft began its descent towards Bradley. Captain Lee addressed the passengers, advising them to expect turbulence all the way down and urging them to take their seats. A high-stakes approach. The approach to Bradley was going to be tough. The pilots were facing a high workload landing on runway 15, which lacked an instrument landing system, ILS. This meant they had to rely on a VOR approach, a more traditional and demanding method that required precise navigation using charts, compass readings, altimeter checks, and distance measurements. As if that wasn't challenging enough, they had to do this in the dead of night, flying through thick clouds and severe turbulence. Captain Lee, clearly uneasy, turned to his first officer saying, "I'll tell you, flying at night, I don't like it, worth it." His discomfort was justified. The situation was about to deteriorate rapidly. The weather turns. At 12:30 a.m., American Airlines Dispatch sent a message to the cockpit. "Attention Captain Lee, have information from Bradley Tower that aircraft have been making landings but have advised of turbulence and low-level wind shear on final. Winds are more aligned with the runway at Boston if that becomes necessary." The winds were so fierce that a diversion to Boston was becoming a real possibility. Adding to their woes, the atmospheric pressure at Bradley had dropped to 29.42 inches of mercury. The standard pressure is 29.92 inches, and anything lower indicates low pressure, which can significantly affect altimeter readings. The pilots needed to calibrate their instruments to this new setting to ensure they knew their true altitude. The altimeter puzzle. American Airlines had a unique procedure at the time. Pilots would set their standby altimeter to the actual air pressure, 29.42 in this case, which displayed the true altitude above sea level. They would then adjust the main altimeter to a modified setting that accounted for the airport's elevation above sea level. Bradley's elevation was 174 feet, so the pilots set their primary altimeters to 29.23 inches of mercury, ensuring that when they landed, the altimeter would read 0 feet instead of 174. This method standardized all approaches, ensuring the altimeters would display consistent readings across different airports. But this night, as the pressure continued to drop, the accuracy of their instruments would be put to the test. The descent begins. As the aircraft descended towards Bradley, First Officer Richards tuned into Bradley's Automatic Terminal Information Service, ATIS, to get the latest weather update. The ATIS reported the pressure at 29.50 inches of mercury, with both runways wet and severe turbulence below 10,000 feet. The word severe wasn't used lightly. It meant the kind of turbulence where pilots momentarily lose control of the aircraft and passengers not strapped in are tossed around like rag dolls. Richards relayed this information to Captain Lee, who noted that the ATIS report was outdated, reinforcing the importance of getting updated information as they neared the airport. To ensure nothing was missed, Captain Lee instructed his first officer to watch him closely during the approach. "Just watch me the whole way, all right?" Lee said. "Yeah, man, you got it," Richards replied. "Any comments? Scream out. You're going to get a lot of turbulence. You know how to land it." As it turned out, Captain Lee's caution was well-founded. Shortly after, air traffic control instructed them to descend to 11,000 feet, updating the pressure setting to 29.40 inches of mercury. This information was already over an hour old, and by now, the actual air pressure was even lower, meaning the plane was flying lower than the altimeter indicated. A critical miscommunication. As they continued to descend, the flight crew went through their before-landing checklist. When Richards called out altimeters, Captain Lee responded with 2950, the outdated pressure setting. Richards tried to correct him, saying, "They called 2947 when we started down. Whatever you want." The correct setting, provided by air traffic control, was 2940, but Richards had misremembered it as 2947. This small error would have massive implications. Even with the incorrect setting, the pilots proceeded with the approach. They should have noticed that the difference between their standby and primary altimeters was 240 feet, not the 174 feet that corresponded to the airport's elevation. But in the high-pressure environment, this detail slipped by, leaving the crew with a dangerously inaccurate altitude reading. The final approach. At 12:45 a.m., the aircraft was cleared to descend to 4,000 feet. The wind, now gusting to 39 knots, over 70 kilometers per hour, was strong enough to cause the windows in the control tower to flex and leak rainwater, forcing an evacuation. Without a tower controller to guide them, the approach controller would be their last point of contact. The pilots were now 15 miles from the airport, descending through 3,500 feet. The weather radar showed no thunderstorms ahead, so Captain Lee turned it off, focusing instead on manually directing the plane through the strong winds. The autopilot was struggling to keep the aircraft on course, so Lee switched to heading select mode, manually adjusting the plane's direction. With the flaps lowered to 40 degrees and the landing gear down, the plane was set up for landing. The passengers, unaware of the drama unfolding in the cockpit, were anxiously waiting to be back on the ground. But they were still 5 minutes from the runway, and the worst was yet to come. A moment of truth. As they approached the airport, the captain began descending to the minimum descent altitude, MDA, of 908 feet above airport elevation. MDA is the lowest altitude pilots can descend without seeing the runway. For Bradley, this was crucial because of a nearby hill that reached 819 feet. The approach charts provided by American Airlines only marked a single point denoting the obstacle's height, making it easy to underestimate the danger. Other airlines, like British Airways, used charts showing the full extent of the terrain, which might have altered how the pilots approached the airport. The captain used the autopilot's vertical speed mode to descend at 1,000 feet per minute, planning to level off at 908 feet. But as the plane reached 1,000 feet, the supervisor in the tower issued a wind shear alert. Wind shear, a rapid change in wind direction, can be deadly during landing, and the pilots knew they had to be ready to go around if needed. American Airlines procedures required the non-flying pilot to call out 3 altitudes during the approach: 1,000 feet above the airport, 100 feet above MDA, and at MDA. Richards called out when they reached 1,000 feet but did not call out 100 feet above the MDA. However, he reminded Captain Lee that 908 feet was the MDA, which served the same purpose. At this point, Richards was looking through the windshield, trying to spot the runway through the rain. When he glanced back at his instruments, he realized the plane had slipped below the MDA. He warned Captain Lee, who quickly pressed the altitude hold button on the autopilot. But it was too late. The sink rate alarm blared in the cockpit, warning of a rapid descent towards the ground. Impact. Traveling at over 250 kilometers per hour, Flight 1572 tore through the tops of trees on a hill crest. The violent impact shook the plane, with branches being sucked into the engines, causing them to flame out. The aircraft was still 2.5 miles from the runway, and the situation was dire. "Go around! Go around! We're going around!" Captain Lee shouted as he pushed the throttles to maximum power and raised the flaps. But the plane was losing airspeed and altitude rapidly. "Left motors failed," Richards called out. "There's the runway straight ahead," he continued. But the reality was grim. They were going down. In a desperate attempt to extend their glide, Captain Lee asked Richards to lower the flaps fully, a risky move that could further reduce airspeed but might also give them the lift needed to make it to the runway. "Keep going. You're gonna make it," Lee urged. The plane clipped the top of a tree near the runway and smashed through the ILS antenna before hitting the ground hard on the edge of the stopway. A miraculous landing. Incredibly, despite the severe damage to the aircraft, Captain Lee managed to land without causing a single serious injury. He ordered the engines shut down and the fire handles pulled, extinguishing any flames. The crew then evacuated the plane, with all passengers and crew escaping unscathed, except for one passenger who suffered minor injuries. The aftermath. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, launched an investigation into the incident. They determined that the primary cause was the crew's failure to maintain the minimum descent altitude. Richards, the first officer, should have been monitoring the instruments instead of looking for the runway, and Captain Lee should have taken manual control when alerted that they were below the MDA. However, the NTSB also praised the crew's actions after the tree strike, highlighting their excellent resource management and flight skills, which were directly responsible for saving lives. A close call. Flight 1572's near disaster serves as a stark reminder of the importance of precision and vigilance in aviation. A small error in altimeter settings, compounded by miscommunication and rapidly changing weather, nearly resulted in a catastrophic crash. Yet thanks to the quick thinking and skill of the crew, what could have been a tragedy ended with all 78 people on board walking away with their lives. If you found this story captivating, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible tales from the world of aviation. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.